appropriation of money, which is our money, for the use of what is purported to be a scientific purpose, but is in reality nonsense?
Yeah, is this mic? Yes, it's working. Okay. That's a very good question, because if you look at the leaders of much of the environmental movement, they are lawyers. And it's very frightening for many scientists because, indeed, these groups are highly funded. They are highly legally oriented. I always find it revealing to see that the heads of most of the organizations have no training in science. So, indeed, they don't consider the science particularly important. But the lawsuits that can be unleashed by these people is a potential threat to everybody. And, in fact, it's interesting that Fred Singer was speaking to me earlier about him and Tim Ball's experience, and there is a move afoot to try to get some sort of legal representation. I can talk to you more later. It sounds like Vincent Gray is about to begin.
Okay. Oh, I can get through. Well, here I am. I'm a scientist, and here I am amidst in the politics section, and I have a title which scares everybody because they have had to change it. They don't like the idea that the whole thing is a scam. They have called the title the Global International Agenda. But it is a scam, folks, and it is a shame. It is, in fact, a surprise to me that many of you don't even seem to realize it. I am going to explain why it's a scam and how it has been achieved. The basic problem is a new religion which has gripped the world and in which most of you believe, I am afraid, and that is environmentalism. The God is the environment, and it is a jealous God that demands constant human sacrifice. And this sacrifice is escalating every day. It has now got to the stage where it is affecting the economy of every country, particularly in this country as well. And there is no end to it. There are commentators who are already saying that it must eventually eliminate even the entire human race. I'm not kidding. There are some commentators who actually see this. And this is because the basic dogma of this religion is that humans are destroying the climate and that we must select, distort and fabricate evidence to prove that this is so. This is now taking place on a gigantic scale. Every single climate event in the world has a lot of reporters go in who try to distort it to make it appear that it is humans who are causing it and changing it. And they have, this is not enough. They have gone on to scientists and they've got them to do this job on science, to distort, to select, distort and fabricate evidence to support the view that humans are destroying the planet and therefore something must be done to stop technology from happening.
Dr. Gray, it's gone off.
It sure has. Oh, somebody took it out.
Though they had to because it stopped receiving a signal from the outside.
Am I not allowed to? Oh dear. Now wait a minute, I need my PowerPoint. Why did they take it out?
It stopped. The laptop stopped working. So they're
Trying to fix it. Okay. Well, it's very difficult because I've got important diagrams that I want you to see. Anyway, I don't need any, I know all this. There have been a number of scientific scams. One of the earliest ones was the Silent Spring scam, which attacked chemical pesticides and insecticides. And there was fraud. They claimed, for example, that DDT causes cancer because there's absolutely no evidence of this at all. It was a fabrication and a lie. But it did succeed in banning the use of DDT, and thereby the pesticides had already greatly increased the productivity of agriculture. they had solved the problem of typhus infection of troops in the Second World War, and they had almost got to the stage of trying to eliminate malaria. Malaria, of course, has resurged subsequently, and I've heard one calculation to say that there are 40 million children who have died from malaria because of Silent Spring, because DDT has been abandoned. It is actually coming back. I think the World Health Organization is actually starting to get it back because they are frightened of malaria. They also invented the strange agriculture of organic agriculture, in which apparently copper and arsenic are regarded as organic, which is absolutely amazing. Well, then we had a second scam, the limits to growth. This was based on another fraud. People dealing with mining resources usually categorize their resource levels in three categories. There are the measured resources, the ones that they've done enough prospecting and to be absolutely sure what is there and how to get it out. And these are normally only a few years ahead, perhaps 10 years for the next production. There is then the estimated ones, which are close enough so that they can go into them once they're getting out of the present measured ones. And then there are the presumed resources. The limits to growth people, the Club of Rome, took the first lot and of course showed that they were going to run out. And they were one of the first who had used computer models to try and make it look respectable to come out with these absurd conclusions. Another point about it was also a new one. The world was about to collapse in the year 2050. Now, most of the people using these computer models always predict a year that is so far ahead that nobody can actually check up on them. No, I'm quite serious. The ICCC does do this all the time. Anyway, that was scam number 2. But anyway, let's come to the main scam, the global warming scam. Now, this has been tried twice before and was no good. It didn't work. Arrhenius started it off in 1895, that's right. And, well, as I think Lord Monckton pointed out in the one I listened to today, Arrhenius actually backed down on it a few years later as being inaccurate. But in any case, it fell down because the temperature of the Earth fell for the next 15 years. And then there was a World War I, and then there was an economic crisis, and people sort of forgot about it. Until there was a man called Callender took it up again in 1938. And he carried out, again, what is fairly typical in these cases. He looked at a whole series of measurements of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and he chose the particular ones that happened to suit his theory, and therefore, launched another global warming scam. This again failed miserably because the Earth's temperature fell for no less than 36 years. And in fact, poor old Callender is practically forgotten. The IPCC don't even recognize he existed. But anyway, after 1976, it got revised again, partly under the pressure of this environmental religion movement. And they had 3 insuperable problems before they could actually launch such a scam. And incidentally, they have not actually solved any of them. They have merely persuaded most of you that they have done it by falsification and so on, by this procedure of selection, distortion, and fabrication. Anyway, let's list them first of all, and I'll go through them. I hope I can get some diagrams out, actually. I don't know what they're doing with my PowerPoint. The first one, they had, in order to establish that this theory was valid, they had to somehow measure the average temperature of the Earth, because if you don't do that, how can you show that the temperature of the Earth is going up? Well, now it so happens you can't do this. There's absolutely no way that you can measure the average temperature of the Earth. It cannot be done, not under any kind of current technology. It would have to involve, I'm talking about the Earth's surface, of course. It would have to be involved the placing of thermometers in a random fashion everywhere on the Earth's surface. And this would have to involve 71% of the Earth's surface, which is ocean. And it just cannot be done. So, you know, how do you then show that it is going up? If you can't do it, you can't show it's going up. So I say that's problem number one, which I consider they have not solved. Problem number two, they had somehow also to measure the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere on a random, reproducible basis all over the Earth's surface. Now, I accept that there is such a thing as a greenhouse effect, that the gases in the atmosphere that absorb infrared from the Earth are responsible for a temperature that is higher than there would be if they did not exist. But anyway, this is a very difficult problem which they have also not solved, and I'll go on later as to why and how they have not solved it. But the final one is even more difficult, and probably the most difficult of all. All of you know that you cannot predict the weather more than a couple of weeks ahead. And yet, they felt in order to establish this theory, they had to predict the weather 100 years ahead. Well, how on earth can you do that? You know, it's impossible. So they had these three impossible tasks. And I'm just briefly going to describe, we haven't got much time, how they managed to do it. Now, the first one, I think many of you may have already seen some presentations about temperature. They certainly haven't measured the average temperature of the Earth. They can't. But they have claimed, even when they can use temperatures measured in meteorological stations. Well, then they are not random. They're not randomly distributed over the Earth. In fact, they're mostly near cities where there is an effect causing a rise because of the increased local population, industry and buildings and so on. And, but even then, I mean, taking the average of these doesn't give you an average. But then they decided, well, we can do the temperature anomaly. That is to say, the rise over whatever average you get out of these weather stations. And this is, of course, what they've done. It's the anomaly. But it's fundamentally flawed from a scientific point of view. I mean, it is amazing to me that scientists will permit a non-random sample for an average. I mean, no public opinion pollster would get away with political polls where they carried out a sample on one street in one city, you know, and said, this is what people are going to vote next year, you know. And the basic reason they can't get away with that is they can be checked up on. But, of course, the way the climate change deal with it is they predict, they go so far ahead that nobody will ever check up on them. But anyway, I reject completely the surface temperature system that has been presented to you several times today. It is based on unrepresentative samples. It is based on measurements which do not, there is nowhere in the Earth have they actually measured the average temperature anywhere. They don't measure averages. In most cases, they just measure one temperature a day. And this was happened at the beginning. Later on, they measured two. They measured the maximum and minimum temperature. Oh, I can't do that. I haven't got any diagrams. Anyway, Well, let's reject it and say that you can actually tell the probable rise in temperature from local temperatures. And I draw your attention to the American figures. The Americans have done a lot of effort in trying to correct their temperatures. And when they've corrected them, they find a sequence which you can see anywhere and is available everywhere, and there is no global warming in America. And it is confessed in some of the papers that the corrections that they used could only be done in America and nowhere else. In other words, the rest of the world is biased. But since I've got to finish, I mean, I reject the temperature record as proving that there's a global warming. Actually, if you take good temperature measurements from local people who've been there for a long time, it does not show a temperature rise. But what it does show is a oscillation. The temperature was high in 1940. The highest temperature in America was in 1934. And it oscillates, and we're presently just come to a top of an oscillation and probably going to go down. But anyway, I better deal with the other ones because these are not being dealt by the other people. The major greenhouse gas is water vapor. Now, you would think that if you wanted to do something to show that global warming is happening, you might actually investigate the question of water vapor. Now, there is no chapter or paragraph in any of the IPCC reports which deals with water vapor. And it is not very easy to find out about it because it does seem to have been suppressed. I have a very ancient atmosphere textbook which actually gives some of the figures, but I couldn't find them anywhere else. The water vapor in the atmosphere is highly dependent on temperature. It's a question, saturation, if it gets cooled, it comes out and it's low temperature. So nearly all the water vapor in the atmosphere is over the tropics, and there is none over the poles. Now, this gave the IPCC a tremendous problem. What are they going to do about it? What did they do? Water vapor is a feedback to models. It can be tucked under the carpet and forgotten. And the assumption, of course, is that this is a uniform thing, feedback, all over the Earth. And it's absolute nonsense. Well, now, my presentation had a recent NASA map of the Earth showing the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, which shows it nearly all over all the tropics and none over the poles. So this elimination of water vapor, they give a thing of radiative forcing of gases, and water vapor isn't one of them because they have to throw it out. They've got rid of it. So they chose the second most important greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide. And what do they do about that? Well, there were 40,000 measurements of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere between 1850 and 1958, which have recently been dug out of the literature by a man called Georg Ernst Beck and published on the internet. And all of these came from respectable, important scientific journals. Some were done by Nobel Prize winners, and the IPCC has simply suppressed them. There's a chapter in the latest IPCC report called The History of the Greenhouse Effect, which does not mention that they ever existed. And they have followed this up by making sure that they only measure carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in extremely restricted circumstances, when the wind from the ocean comes and it stays more or less constant for 6 hours, is the only time. And they don't measure it anywhere else, claiming that it is noise. For example, nobody has the foggiest idea what the carbon dioxide concentration is above New York. And yet we're trying to reduce emissions. Nobody knows whether it's what it is at the moment or what it will be if they've altered it. They don't measure it at all, or if they do, they don't let you know. And there are no measurements published for any land surface or what happens apart from this. So it's been, they try to pretend that carbon dioxide is well mixed in the atmosphere when it is not. And I have actually found it difficult to understand why they have to be so extreme on this. One reason is that in order to calculate the radiative forcing from carbon dioxide, you use an equation with a logarithm in it. And of course, the low figure, if you've got a distribution, the low figures count for much more than the high ones, and they get a higher figure than is real. But I'm in a rush, so I better deal with the third one, which is the one I think is more important. The models are based on a model of the Earth which is completely false. It has been distributed widely. I've got it in my PowerPoint, but I can't show it to you. It is based on the flat Earth theory of energy. They believe, or rather they think, they can calculate the temperature of the Earth from a theory in which the temperature of the Earth is constant, the amount of sunshine coming in is constant, the Earth is flat, that everything is constant, and that it is balanced. Every single part of this is nonsense. There is no part of the Earth where the energy input and output is balanced, ever. And there is no particular reason why it should be balanced on average, either. The thermal capacity of the Earth is so great that it could easily be heated for a few hundred years and then cooled for another few hundred. It's ridiculous, this particular concept. These averages, they don't know the temperature of the Earth, but they calculate the Earth's radiation by applying to the supposed average the Stefan Boltzmann equation. Well, I don't know if you know what this is. The amount of radiation depends on the fourth power of the absolute temperature. So if you take the average, you completely distort the whole thing, because the high temperatures, if you've got a distribution, of course you have. I mean, it's sometimes hot, sometimes it's cold. The high temperatures play much more. You should take the average of the fourth power of all the temperatures in the Earth, and they vary very considerably. There is night and day. This model does not accept that there's such a thing as night and day, or seasons, or changes in latitude. And they use non-linear equations all the way through. Now, every part of the Earth, the interaction with all these factors is different, and you just cannot do the averages. Now, this concept is the basis of all the models. So I regard all the models as worthless. Now, you've also found, I don't know if you have, that where the models are tested, they don't work anyway. That well, it's another thing. I hardly have time, but one of my greatest successes was with one of the IPCC reports where they had a chapter called Validation of Climate Models. I put in the suggestion that since no model has ever been validated, it was an inappropriate word. They changed it 50 times in one chapter to the words evaluation. They never make predictions, they always make projections. They do not make correlations, they make attributions. They have a wonderful turn of altering the words so that something you ought not to be able to do happens. And then finally, how do they decide whether the models are any good? This is almost unbelievable, but it's true. They asked the man who made the model whether he thought it was any good. And if he said yes, okay, it's very likely. Now, what level of likelihood would you put in? 90%. And everybody believes that somebody who has a conflict of interest in the models is an opinion which you should take notice of. He is financially dependent on the model. He receives money to present it, and that he's asked whether he thinks it's any good. And this is what they put in their recommendations. So I think that's possibly enough. I mean, the fact of the matter, I'm sorry I haven't got my PowerPoint. I had all sorts of illustrations of this. In any case, I might say that the Heartland asked everybody to send a PowerPoint. Everybody sent one which took 2 hours. And then just before we came, we were told we only had 20 minutes. So I'm just as well off as anybody else. But anyway, the fact of the matter is the whole thing is a scam. There is no reason why anybody should cut carbon dioxide. The whole thing is ruining the earth, this country and every other country. And sooner or later, you'll just have to realise it and you know, it must come to an end. It's all wrong.
Please accept my profound